Hello and welcome. This is our fourth vaccine Q&A all about COVID vaccines. My name is Erica from the British Society for Immunology, and I'm joined today by Dr. Donald Palmer from the Royal Veterinary College, University of London. Hello, Donald, and welcome.
Welcome, Erica. It's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Let's get straight to it then. Question number one. Why is vaccinating generally more robust than naturally being infected with a virus?
Now, this is a really interesting question. Now, one needs to be concerned about natural infection because in some examples with a natural infection, it can lead to severe disease, it can lead to hospitalization. And when we talk specifically about COVID-19, sadly, it could lead to death. The real key about vaccination is that one of the reasons why it's robust is primarily it's harmless. Most vaccines, and particularly the COVID-19 vaccines, doesn't cause disease. It can also be robust in the sense that it will more than likely develop a more effective immune response in comparison to a natural infection.
Question number two. How do we know the vaccines are safe if they haven't been around for very long?
Now, this is an interesting question around vaccine safety and how long these vaccines have been around. While, yes, the messenger RNA vaccines are new in given into human for human disease, it should be noted that the technology for both these vaccines has actually been around for a number of years. Now, in terms of safety, it's got to be made clear is that these vaccines have had to go through the normal regulatory procedure as with any medicine or drug. And those have not been cut. So the important agency that's been involved in that is the Medicine and Health Product Regulatory Agency. It's an independent organization, and they're also continually monitoring the safety of these vaccines.
Question number three. If the vaccines are considered safe, why do they have side effects?
I think it's important to recognize what these side effects are. These side effects are really a reflection of your immune response. So the response that sometimes are given after vaccinations, where there may be headache, there may be a slight ache or an increase in body temperature, actually, that's your immune response taking place. And in parts, what the vaccine is doing is actually mimicking an infection. So the side effects that you see, I want to reassure folks, is actually a normal immune response.
Question number four. When a vaccine is being made, is it tested against just one strain, the main strain?
So in these clinical trials, the vaccine, or should I say the strain of virus that's being used is the common strain that's in circulation. And so generally, that's the vaccine that's going to be used. What we're now seeing is the fact that there are now in circulation some other strains. And it may be necessary to start doing work on these strains in order to test vaccine efficacy.
Question number five. Hearing the news that the new strains of SARS-CoV-2 are more transmittable, what causes that?
So what we should recognize is that viruses will constantly mutate so it can be advantageous to itself. And an important point for a virus is to make sure it can spread from one host to another. So they will always try and mutate in order to be more transmissible. So these mutations may include, for example, being able to be readily emitted into the atmosphere, more resistant to the environment, and also being able to make more products that can then be let out into the atmosphere. Equally, one aspect of increasing transmissibility is the fact that viruses, when they try and mutate, they try to be more sticky when they want to adhere to the cells to get in, because that's how viruses work. Viruses work on the basis is that they have to invade the cell and get inside the cell machinery, and that requires an interaction. And so an increased transmissibility could be a case where virus try to evade the natural immune responses, but also try to be more sticky and then enter into a cell.
So question number 6, is it likely that we will need to have yearly COVID vaccines?
It is not uncommon for viruses to mutate. When you develop a vaccine, I don't want to take this from the very beginning and how the immune response works. So I just want to make people clear about this. When the body makes an immune response to a virus or to a vaccine, that response is very specific. It's very specific in its nature. So when a virus mutates, what can now happen is the immune response that's been generated can no longer recognize that new variant. And so what you may have to do is you may now have to develop a new vaccine so that you make a new immune response that can now recognize this variant. This is not uncommon because this is what happens when we have our yearly flu vaccine. What happens is that halfway through the year, scientists and other people meet to discuss what is the new flu variant that is out there, and then that's what's used to make the flu vaccine. So COVID, and it might be a case that if there are new mutations coming out, it's possible that may need to develop yearly vaccines to counteract these new variant strains.
Question number 7, what are the benefits and disadvantages of having a different vaccine for the second jab?
It's really important to recognize that mixing of vaccines did not occur in the clinical trials. So what's been done in the clinical trials is that the same vaccine was used for both the first and the second jab. So it's clearly a case that we don't know if it's possible. I'm aware that clinical trials are currently undertaking to investigate that possibility. So it's not clear yet on the outcome. But there may be some advantage to that, potentially more of a practical nature. So one can imagine on the basis of supply, whereby what's available. And equally, there may be some circumstances where the patients themselves can't remember what they had as the first jab. So if the outcome from the clinical trials show that mixing of these vaccines is possible, then then we can go forward with that particular scenario. But I think we've got to really wait until we get the data from the clinical trials.
Question number 8. Is the vaccine really less effective in the elderly population? Is that expected?
So there's a general consensus here about vaccine effectiveness in the elderly, in the older population. So in general, we know that vaccines given to elderly individuals, their effectiveness is weak in comparison to younger individuals. That doesn't mean they don't make a response, but their response is weak. And the evidence suggests so far that when they have done clinical trials, and indeed in the population, that older individuals are making an immune response. And what people are going to be doing is they're going to be monitoring that and looking at that closely. The other reason why there's evidence around the use of vaccines in older individuals is that there's some recent data that's actually looked at older individuals that have actually had the infection. And there you can actually see the presence of antibodies. So it's quite clear older individuals are making an immune response. So the fact that there is the natural infection, but the clinical trials suggest that vaccines in the older population will indeed be effective. One of the reasons why the flu vaccine in the UK is given to the elderly population, like I said, despite the evidence that you produced a weak response, there's still evidence of it being effective in the fact that the number of older people that are sadly being infected and dying of flu is clearly been reduced. So it does have an important impact. And I think because of that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why older individuals are being vaccinated.
Question number 9, immunosuppressed individuals and the vaccine. Is there any data on how protected they will be?
So in terms of immunosuppressed individuals, or indeed individuals that are at risk, data, I believe, is being collected on this at the moment. But I want to reassure those individuals is that don't forget there are vaccines that are currently being that immunosuppressed and at-risk individuals currently take. But don't forget, in the UK, where several millions have now been vaccinated, and the first cohort are within the elderly population, one could argue that their immune system is somewhat immunosuppressed. And the evidence suggests is that there seems to be making a reasonable immune response. So if you extrapolate that information as well, I think those that are at risk or immunosuppressed should be confident that these vaccines will also provide protection.
And our final question, this one's coming from Twitter. Are the vaccines effective?
This is an interesting question because the vaccine, as some people says, has been made in a relatively short space of time in comparison to others. As however, I said before, this the clinical trial and more importantly, the safety regulations have not been shortcut. In terms now of their effectiveness, the evidence now is coming out that there's evidence now that it lowers the transmission. This has been shown for the AstraZeneca vaccine, but overall, with all the clinical trials of the vaccines that have been approved in this country, there's evidence now that none of the individuals that have had these vaccines have been hospitalized or actually have had severe COVID. So on the basis of that, it appears that these vaccines appear to be effective with COVID-19. But again, more research is ongoing. But I think it's really important to recognize that so far, those that have taken the vaccines, and indeed in the clinical trials, they've not undergone severe COVID or hospitalization. And that's really important. And, you know, that does suggest vaccine effectiveness.
Thank you so much, Donald, for answering those questions. And thank you, everyone, for submitting those questions. Please do tune in again. We'll definitely be back. So thank you so much, Donald. Goodbye.
Well, can I say thank you, Erica? It's really been a pleasure talking to you, and really to everyone for submitting your questions. They've been thought-provoking, interesting, and it's been a pleasure to answer them. Keep your questions coming, because here at the BSI, we are more than happy to answer any of your queries. So take care and stay safe. Goodbye.